Okay, everybody. Hi. How's it going? How you doing? Some of you have got to be sick of me because you just had me for 2 hours. But the rest of you don't know who I am. I'm Ryan Kalo. I'm a law professor here at the University of Washington. Can I get a show of hands? Who are people that have legal training or are pursuing legal training right this moment? That's you. You are pursuing legal training. You have a little bit of legal training. So who is here that is actually from another department or a different kind of training? Wow, you guys are all sitting together, but yeah, great. And I assume like iSchool communications, those sorts of things, is that basically? Great. Well, this is a topic that brings together a lot of different communities, and I'm just so delighted to have my very, very good friend and colleague at the University of Maryland, Danielle Citron, here talk about her new book. This book has just gotten a phenomenal amount of positive attention, reviews from some of the top people in the field, and highly, highly visible excerpts in places like Time and Newsweek. It's just been, it's that rare book that captures both an extremely salient moment in our culture, right? Because if you think about it, Danielle's been writing this book for a long time. It takes a long time to research a book like this, and it's coming out at a time with Gamergate and revenge porn and everything else by coincidence. So it's this really important moment where we need thought leadership, but also it is theoretically very sophisticated. And the people like Martha Nussbaum, one of the top philosophers in this area, weighing in on it, and she's been speaking at a lot of different kinds of venues, including the very top schools in the United States, including our own. And so it's this really wonderful confluence of sophisticated and highly, highly relevant. I just wanted to share very quickly that I was thinking about, obviously, doing this intro this morning, and I was on Twitter. I spend a little time on Twitter, as my students know. And I came across this situation just this morning, and I don't know if you even saw this, Danielle, but there's this woman named Rose Eveleth, and she is a science fiction reviewer and a journalist who writes about technology and science. And I actually met her a few months ago. And I got to tell you, she's just like the nicest, most unassuming, wonderful person. And she happened to have the temerity to tweet something sarcastic about one of the people involved in Gamergate, which is this, if you guys don't know, it's the situation where folks in the gaming community are really upset about what they claim to perceive it as being basically basically they're upset about women participating in the gaming industry, but the way it's coming out is as a kind of journalistic ethics. They're claiming that certain women in the gaming industry have relationships with reviewers and they're getting positive reviews as opposed to just doing really great games. And she had the temerity to comment upon this, and it was incredible. But exactly what Danielle predicted exactly happened. Right? And so having read her book, I got to say, the one thing you do reading the book is as I did, again and again and again, you think to yourself, this can't be true. How could people act this way? How could this be right? And then I actually witnessed it this morning. She got multiple death threats. Please kill yourself. Jump off a cliff, please. Just one thing after another, calling her these terrible names and calling her ugly and all these different things. And again, just the sweetest person making one sarcastic comment on the internet. She's basically been bullied into sort of silence today, and everybody else is supporting her. So the point is that this stuff is happening all the time. It's real. I really encourage you to pick up the book when you get a chance. But on the theory that I've already overstayed my welcome and you're really here to hear from Danielle, I'm going to introduce her right now. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
And you could never, okay, ready guys, so I'm a little sick, so bear with me, right, on the voice, but I have to say you could never be sick of Ryan Kalo, right? How is that even remotely possible? He's such a gem. I met Ryan, I have to say, 8 years ago. This is my ode to Ryan Kalo. I met him 8 years ago at the first Privacy Law Scholars Conference, and he is such a star. So we all knew this back then, that he was going to be like the rock star of privacy. And I predicted it, and I was right. Few things I can say I was right in this world, but so it's such a joy to come to your beloved school and talk about my work on online harassment. So It's true that it seems so auspicious, the timing of the book coming out at the time of, these sustained attacks on women in gaming and the release of Jennifer Lawrence and celebrities and non-celebrities alike, the hacking and then release of photos and spread all over the internet. And those sorts of attacks are just, they're the heart of the book, right? So I'm talking about ways in which harassers and cyber mobs use network technologies to really just deprive people of their essential life opportunities. And what law can do about it, what it should do about it, and what we all can do about it, private actors, schools, parents, intermediaries. So today I think I'll focus on the phenomenon of online harassment. What is it, right? And what's its destructive impact? How can law grapple with, how should it, or can we do that without trampling on the First Amendment? And we can. So first you might ask, what does it mean, cyber harassment? So often there's this misimpression that we don't have a meaning in the law, but we do. We have a pretty clear meaning, and I'll give you the bare bone definitions, but it's much more important to understand how it's perpetrated. So when we talk about cyber stalking and cyber harassment, we're referring to repeated or persistent online expression that's targeted at someone that is designed to cause substantial emotional distress and often the fear of physical harm, right? But much more importantly is understanding the strategies of how it's accomplished. So the first is that, and forgive me if I feel like I sound terrible. The first is, harassers basically terrorize people. So as Ryan was just talking about with this beloved science fiction writer, they threaten physical violence, often threaten rape or anal rape. And they impersonate people, suggesting their interest in sex and providing their home address. The second strategy is basically to try to hijack people's careers. So spreading lies about them and then really gaming search engines to ensure that the destructive posts are prominent in searches of people's names. The third strategy is privacy invasion. So hacking into someone's computer to steal their nude photos or compromising photos or social security number, and then spreading that all over the web, or in cases involving ex-intimates, taking what was shared in confidence and with the assumption of privacy, and then posting it all over the net, or sending it to employers, as is so often the case. And the last strategy is a technological one, right? So harassers use technology to silence people. So they employ DDoS attacks to shut down websites, or they file false reports to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube to suggest that someone's online profiles are hate speech, spam, or terrorism, which of course they're not. And the hope is that to shut people's sort of life's either work or enjoyment down. So I think that just helps set the stage. I think how we really can understand these problems is to give you examples, right? So I'm going to start with Anita Sarkeesian, who, it's true that in the most recent iteration of Gamergate, she suffered some significant part of the attacks, but it began long ago. So 2 years ago, Anita announced on Kickstarter that she was raising money to create a documentary about women in video games. So really the way in which women are portrayed in video games, right? And so I would say it took about 3 days for a cyber mob to descend. And within 3 days, she begins to receive anonymous and pseudonymous emails and then direct tweets threatening rape, some including doctored photos of her that look like she's being raped, and her home address. At the same time, and you can unfortunately still find it today, there's a game online called Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian. And so when you look, you see her striking face, and then when you press any key, her face gets increasingly bloodied and more purple, so more beaten looking. And it wasn't just to scare her, right? But of course that did the trick, certainly. But to shut down her work she was doing. So Kickstarter received hundreds of false reports that her campaign was fraudulent. And YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook at the same time received abuse complaints that her profiles were this is the irony I always think, hate speech, spam, and terrorism, right? Okay. And her website, Feminist Frequency, was hit with DDoS attacks on an intermittent basis for 2 years. So one day it would be up, and then 20 minutes for 20 minutes it would be down, and when she would wrestle with it and call whoever she could call, and it was frustrating. It has been frustrating, and it has not stopped. So in August, when this sort of hashtag emerges, posts these threats of Zoe Quinn and her nude photos spread all over the internet and accusations that Zoe Quinn is sleeping with men just to get good reviews on games, untrue, right? The attacks on Anita start again in great earnest. So she receives emails with her home address, her parents' home address, and saying, bitch, we know where you are, and you're next. So Anita moves out of her house, and she can't go to her parents' house. So she's sort of like couch surfing. She was set to give a talk at Utah State, and the university, so the counsel's office, received a call from and emails. And what the message was, if you let Anita Sarkeesian speak at your school, there will be the bloodiest school shooting in the history of our country. And the emails were so detailed and so gruesome, right, that Anita calls me, and do I go? I was like, no, of course not, right? And so she talks to the Utah State Police, which is like, honestly, a comedy of errors. It's just so unfortunate what happens, right? But she talks to them, and we're going to talk about how law enforcement have some difficulty with these issues. But they say to her, Anita says, look, I might come if we can ensure the event is safe. So we either have a pat down of people just making sure no one's carrying guns because the person has threatened a school shooting, right? And the response from the police is like almost law students, you guys will just scratch your head. But the response was, well, we have concealed carry laws, so we really shouldn't do any pat downs, right? We're not allowed. Okay, let's have a moment. Professor, if it was President Obama or U.S. Senator or the CEO of Pepsi, do we really think in giving a talk that local police will say, oh, we can't check security? I mean, it's so ludicrous as to be frightening, right? So Anita's like, look, I'm not coming. It's just not worth it. So those attacks, of course, silence the work she's doing, right? But of course, it's not just the prominent. Anita's really well known. Like, since the last 2 years, she is an extraordinary voice on these issues. She's a media critic. She's all over the place. But it's not just the well-known, right? So in my work on my book, I interviewed about 60 people. And there are countless more, and we'll talk statistics in a second, but they're the ordinary people, right? It's the dentist, the business owner, the stay-at-home parent, the law student, the grad student studying statistics, the nurse, right? It is the everyday person who confronts this kind of abuse. So let me tell you a little bit about Holly Jacobs. She's at the heart of also my book. So I tell kind of 3 stories, and Holly's one of them. Holly was getting her PhD at FIU in industrial psychology, and she was dating a guy for 3 years, and they lived in Florida but in different parts of the state. So they didn't get to see each other as much as they would have liked, and they exchanged intimate images and videos, and it was a two-way street. And the understanding was that it was for their eyes only, right? And there was an absolute level of trust. And after they break up, Holly gets emails, like a series of emails, not just one, but there's one day where she gets like inundated with emails. And the emails say, I'm interested in sex with you. You're so hot. I saw your posts. Holly's like, no idea what's going on. She Googles her name, and she finds that in over 300 sites, so revenge porn sites and porn sites, are her pictures, videos of her in sexually compromised situations, and all of her contact information. So her home address, work bio, email, cell phone number. And some of the posts are impersonations suggesting she's interested in anonymous sex. Others spread the sort of falsehood that she sleeps with her students and is available for a good time. So it says like, hot for teacher, FIU grad student, Holly and her former last name, which was quite unique, ready for sex, and then it includes these photos and her contact information. She also receives an email from a pseudonymous, she doesn't know who it is, but she imagines she knows who it is, right? And the email says, if you don't send me more photos, I'm going to release your photos to your part-time, because she had a consulting job, to your employer. And she doesn't respond. She's not going to respond. And the next day, her part-time employer, consulting company, receives like a cache of all these nude photos. She feels like she has to quit the job because the address of the job is all over the internet, right? That she works there. Her university encourages her to change her name. They had received phone calls from someone saying that she was sleeping with students and accusing her of sleeping with students. And the university was frankly worried for itself, right? And as Holly said to me, you know what, it wasn't advice I wanted to hear, right? But it made sense. She said, look, I'm eminently unemployable, undateable, right? And I'm scared out of my head. So she changes her name to a name that's really common, last name. She tried to contact these websites. You know, she said it took hours and hours and hours. These are over 300 sites. And she explains to them in a notice and takedown sort of way. Many of these pictures I took myself. I own the copyright. Please take it down. See DMCA. Notice and takedown rules. And she gets no response from most of them, right? Why not? Because they figure, sue me. You're not going to sue. You have no money, right? So they largely ignore her. There are about 20 sites that write her back quite quickly and say, well, if you pay me $400, I will take down the pictures. And some quoted her like $99. So it was like between $99 and $399. And she paid a few and then figured, like, I don't have much money. I'm a grad student. And she knew it would be like a game of whack-a-mole. Like once some came down, and it was interesting. One site located in Russia was very kind and wrote her back and said, of course, like whatever I can do. It's like the one person, right? Like go figure, maybe Snowden has it right. Am I allowed to say that? You're totally taping me, okay. I don't know, love America, don't spy on me. You know, she's just like amazed and feels incredibly frustrated. So as we talk, we'll talk about like what then happens. But these stories are not unique, right? So it's estimated we need to do more sustained study empirically of cyber harassment and cyber stalking, but we have something, right? So in 2006, the Bureau of Justice Statistics does a study of stalking, and it's defined in just the way I've defined it for you quite systematically. And they find that 3.4 million people experience stalking in our country. And it's estimated that 850,000 people experience stalking via networked technologies. Okay, so we have some sense. We know that there was a Pew report that just came out that suggests that the number is going to be larger, that over 20% of individuals are sexually harassed online or stalked and defined in that way that I'm talking about. Or at least stalking has a much more narrow meaning. And it's true that the majority of victims are female, but men are stalked too. Right? And the abuse is so similar. It is sexually threatening and sexually humiliating, and it lines up in just the same way, right? So it's threats of violence, but it's rape threats and threats of anal rape. And men are impersonated on dating sites. And the dating sites say, I'm ready for anal sex, anonymous, come on down, right? So it's not that women are the only ones, but it lines up in very much the same way. They're lies, right? But they're not just lies about, God knows, we could make something up, but they're accuse people of having sexually transmitted diseases, right? So women have herpes, men have AIDS, women are prostitutes, men are prostitutes. And the privacy invasions, again, make sense. They're posting someone's nude photographs, happens to more often women, right? But they're increasing stories of men whose employers have received their nude photos by vengeful exes, right? So we see the same strategy of humiliation and shaming. So what's the harm, right? So of all the people I've talked to, you know, it fundamentally disrupts people's lives, right? So Anita moves, Holly Jacobs changes her name. Her name is Holly Jacobs now, and I'll explain why I can share that name with you in a little bit. People, they can't feel safe. So they change apartments, they change jobs. Right? It can be, the costs for professional lives are incredibly steep. So I talked to dentists and doctors who some of the abuse is like folds over onto doctor rating sites and Yelp. And then what happens is they go from having 5-star ratings. to 1-star ratings in which they're accused of sleeping with their students and having AIDS. Thinking of all of you guys, patients and having AIDS. And so as one dentist told me, she lost her practice. Her malpractice rates went through the roof. She was in Manhattan. She had to move her practice to Brooklyn and change her name from her married name to her maiden name because she just couldn't practice under her married name because all of this abuse was all over the internet. And we know that, and I'm not going to tell you guys anything that you don't know, right? But over 80% of employers use Google or any search engine as an employment tool, right? So there's this great Microsoft study from 2009 that says over 80% of employers use search tools to investigate potential employees from the interview stage to hiring. And there's a negative result in over 70% of the cases. And the sort of more granular reasons given for not hiring people is one big category was unsuitable photographs and the next unsuitable lifestyle, right? So, teachers have lost their jobs because vengeful acts have put their nude photos online. And the response is not, we think you put it up there. But rather, we can't have someone teaching elementary school with this stuff online and parents Googling you, right? So I do not believe that employers necessarily buy that women or the individuals who are victimized have sexually transmitted diseases, criminal records, that they are interested in sex and they're putting up these sex ads. I don't think so. I think they're making the smart economic choice to not hire someone who brings risk, right? And that risk is clients Googling their names, the employee's name, and saying to the employer, "What are you thinking?" Right? Why'd you hire that person? And isn't it in this market where we know it's tough to get jobs, and there's so many exceptional people that as between two exceptional candidates, you're going to go with the one who's less risky, right? Who comes with less baggage. The emotional costs are really steep. So I talk to victims and they can't sleep at night and they're Googling, they wake up in a cold sweat, Googling themselves what other shoe is dropping today. And it's silencing, right? So I've talked to too many bloggers who, when attacked, go offline because every time they speak, it's like they're punished, right? So they feel like even if they tried to create a positive web presence for themselves, it's such a risky proposition because it's calling for the cyber mob to smash them and say, no, you're not going to have a positive influence on your own name. We're going to make sure, and I'm just taking a quote from some of these posts on AutoAdmit, attacks on female law students there, that bitch is not going to have her LinkedIn post be prominent. Ours are going to be, too bad, so sad, right? And they write this explicitly. So there's clearly a gaming and instead of instructions about how to engage in Google bombs to ensure that this positive presence isn't established by the victim. Okay, so that's what the threat landscape looks like in some respects, right? The phenomenon. So what do we do about it? And this is the tricky part, of course, right? The tackling it is a complicated task. We need law, of course. And we need a partnership with many other actors. But it's often true that we assume law can't do anything. And that's just not true, right? So I'm going to talk to you guys about what law can do and the extent to which law can without trampling on the First Amendment. Because I know so much of us, we're law students, so for the most part, or high school students, so we're interested in what can we do now? Where are our instruments, right, to bring the hammer down? Okay, so let's talk about the harassers. What can law do, right? So we know that harassers can be sued. So Ryan, you just had torts, right? No? Did you just teach torts? Okay, some of my favorite torts, and I wish I was sitting in Orion's class for them. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, public disclosure of private fact, defamation. Perfectly suited, right? So tailored for this, sustained abuse, right? The problem is it's incredibly expensive to sue. And so these causes of action are sort of fabulous in theory and almost impractical in fact. But we have one sort of ray and hope, and I'm going to, where's Dave and Kate? Okay. So out of what I say, the dark night, 7 years working on this issue in which I speak to all of these victims and no one is there to help them, and I'm a member of the bar in New York, but I don't practice law, right? I'm a law professor. So I have a ton of friends who do anti-harassment advocacy, but we needed lawyers. And K&L Gates has so generously and so creatively contacted the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, an advocacy group started by Holly Jacobs, who I talked to you about, and now is providing pro bono work with 40 lawyers for revenge porn victims and online harassment victims. So I just feel like I'm like bursting with joy to tell you that. And they're here, so thank you so much. What a great firm to be a summer associate or associate at. Holy cow. So I've been talking across the country in the last, I've been at a different school every week, and every week I'm like plugging K&L Gates. I'm so incredibly grateful. And in fact, at Duke, someone said I just accepted an offer there, so I'm so happy you told me that. I was like, yes. But really, for the most part, they have 40 lawyers, but can we do it all? This problem is a big one, right? And so often, at least in the work that I've done, civil law is a great theoretical idea. It is tough to execute because so often, think about it this way, had a lawyer call me and said, look, I really want to take this revenge porn case on contingency, but the problem is we know who the perpetrator is for the most part. We can pretty much well guess. He's judgment proof. He has no money. And I just can't take this case on contingency with all the costs that are going to spool, right, if this person is judgment proof. Okay. What about criminal law? Right, so the title of my book is Hate Crimes in Cyberspace, so fill in the gaps. Where does criminal law step in? Now, there are criminal laws on the books that we can today use. Threat laws, stalking laws, harassment laws that in at least 50 states will, and at the federal level, will cover abuse that appears on third-party sites, right? But the big problem is that when victims go to law enforcement gives them like the look my kids give me when they're like lost at something, like the wide eyes, and they just are overwhelmed by the technology, right? They're intimidated. And so the response is, oh, turn your computer off. Boys will be boys. This just can't be that big of a deal. Clean up your search results. And I think really what's behind that is that they just don't have the technical assistance. And I've talked to law enforcement that have confirmed this. That it's the few law enforcement, and like LA's threat assessment unit in New York has a terrific cybercrime unit, but they're rare. And they have got forensic scientists working sort of to back them up to figure out how to trace posters. And California has been a leader too, and I'm going to talk a little bit about California's role. But that's rare. So they don't get the technology, and also, this is sort of criminal itself, they don't get the law. They really need training. And so when Holly goes to the police, and when Anita went to the police, it was, what's Twitter? What's going on? Like, why do you care? Turn it off. I mean, she's a journalist. Okay. But the law, so Holly goes to Florida, state, local, city, Miami, police, and the FBI. And the response at the local level, even though there's an aggravated harassment statute that would be helpful, would cover third-party abuse, sites not directly communicated to victims. And the response was, you gave your boyfriend the photos. What did you expect? They're his now. He can do whatever he wants with it. Come on, this is a civil matter. So she shows them the aggravated harassment statute I gave her, right? And they say, oh, come on, this is a civil matter. It just can't be worth our time. It's a misdemeanor, right? Buy a gun. It's Florida, right? So they say, buy a gun. And Allie's like, oh, see, she buys a stun gun. But really, like, is that the kind of thing we want to tell victims, right? No. She goes to the FBI. And the response is, listen, it's not a matter of national security. We don't do this. We only do, if we do interpersonal crimes, it's rape, it's murder, and national security. That's what we do. But this is the fascinating thing, right, guys? So the FBI has clear statistics about their arrest rates. And in the past 3 years, the top 3 crimes for which the FBI is arresting people is for drug possession, aggravated assault, and larceny, like property theft, which is, we know we're taking criminal law now, right? Larceny theft is like you're not threatening anyone, you're stealing a car, right? So we're making the assessment that our resources are better spent investigating the FBI, stolen BMWs that frankly have insurance behind them, right, than we are for the kinds of meaningful, quantifiable costs, right, that victims experience in cyber stalking and cyber harassment. Okay. But law needs some reforms, and we'll talk a little bit about civil rights law and criminal law. There are, in about 45 states, harassment laws that only cover and stalking laws, abuse directly sent to victims. So case from New York, defendant named Ian Barber. He sends his girlfriend's, ex-girlfriend's nude photos to her employer, everybody in her email inbox, including her clients. I think she was like a farmer rep, and her family members. And he puts it on Twitter. And he's indicted, not indicted because it's a misdemeanor. He's pursued for aggravated harassment. It's a misdemeanor in New York. And the charges are thrown out because aggravated harassment only applies in New York to abuse directly sent to victims. So, right, like sending her the pictures isn't harmful. No. So the case is dismissed, so we need some sort of basic nuts and bolts response to some of these laws, which frankly are sort of technologically bound. They're email harassment laws. Let's update them. Let's make them technologically neutral. We can do it. We can look to federal cyberstalking and email harassment laws for help. They have accomplished that in the last couple of years. Revenge porn is an issue I've been working on with lawmakers across the country, and particularly in Maryland. There are times when someone's nude photo is posted online and it's just one or two photos. So it's not a harassing course of conduct, right? But it is prominent in the search of someone's name and it's really destructive, right? And those victims go to law enforcement, and of course, and rightfully, the law enforcement officer will say, like, there's really nothing I can do. And they're telling the truth, right? So I've been working with the ACLU in Maryland. We crafted a statute. We thought we had it right. It goes into committee. It comes out sort of broken. So I don't have great news for you. It's passed, though. It's overbroad. It's under-inclusive. We want to hit our heads against the wall. But I think we can make these laws better. And that's why all of you need to go be lawmakers. We need much better lawyers as lawmakers, I have to say. That effort is ongoing. So 14 states have now criminalized revenge porn. I'm working with Attorney General Kamala Harris in California on her task force against cyber exploitation. And one of our kind of 3 tasks in our task force is working on amending legislation. California has been like a real forerunner in so many respects due to A.G. Harris. But even they think their own criminal act involving revenge porn is too narrow. So we're going to be working on some of these issues and training among them. Civil rights law. I mean, fundamentally, guys, so much abuse, so much harassment and stalking, I think, should be understood as a civil rights violation, right? What else does anyone know about Anita Sarkeesian but that she's a woman daring to write about, sexism in video games? And she's targeted with sexually threatening and sexually humiliating abuse that's designed to interfere with her crucial life opportunities. That's what civil rights laws are all about. They're about protecting people from bias that's designed to hijack their crucial life opportunities, their work, right, their ability to engage in expression. And we do have some laws on the books, civil rights laws, but the problem is they're limited to bias and intimidation based on race, national origin, and religion. And in some sense, that makes sense. Think about the Klan, right? Intimidating blacks and Vietnamese fishermen from doing their work by just simply standing there and not letting them go into their job, right? That very much a 19th and 20th century problem, but we need to update our civil rights laws. And in my book, I talk about all the other ways in which we can think about leveraging civil rights law. So what about site operators? You might be thinking, that's great. Harassers need to be slowed down. Law needs to be brought to bear against them. But what about the site operators, right? They're the closest to the abuse. They are, you might call, the least cost avoider. They can minimize harm in the most effective way, right? We know, do you guys know about the Communications Decency Act, Section 230? No, really? It's always fun if you want some tech people, all right. But also, okay, and this is always the irony of this moment where I explain it's called the Decency Act. Let's just have a moment and think about that. The Decency Act, okay, passed in 1996 by proposed by two very conservative representatives, endorsed by two very conservative senators. And the idea was that we wanted to incentivize online service providers to block, and I'm just taking the words of the statute, block offensive content. And we wanted to reward good Samaritans. I'm taking the title of the statute that we're talking about, this subsection. We want to be able to assure good Samaritans who are blocking offensive content that they won't be sued for doing an incomplete job. And this whole act, Decency Act, basically was a pro-censorship bill to rid the internet, this is going to seem crazy to you, but of indecent material to protect children. Like, can you imagine an internet without indecent material? I so cannot in 2014. But that said, right, most of the statute is struck down in a case that we all embrace as First Amendment scholars called ACLU versus Reno. But the one piece of it remains, like the one hangover, is this Section 230 of the Decency Act. And lower courts, since 96, interpret it very broadly. Initially on the idea is that innovation is so important for this young baby internet, right? We need to nurture it and grow. And the statute, whose words say that no internet service provider will be treated as a speaker or publisher of somebody else's content, is interpreted not just to immunize sites from speaker or publisher liability, but also distributor liability. That says when you know, you've got notice, right, about defamation, let's say, and you don't do anything about it, you could face then strict sort of publisher liability. But we go far further than that even. In a series of lower court cases, Supreme Court's never weighed in. Lower courts find that even sites that encourage, solicit criminal activity, they're immune from liability unless they sort of have paid for it. So they'd be considered like co-developers, right? But largely, that's why you have revenge porn operators who are shameless talking to the press. They're like, we can't be sued, you know? So it's not my fault that people are shaming these women. Shame the shame, like, really, folks, right? The hubris is unbelievable, but they're not wrong, right? And so in my book, I talk about a very narrow amendment to Section 230, one that would truly only cover the worst actors, those that encourage, solicit criminal content and don't take it down, or sites that primarily host content that's cyberstalking and or non-consensual pornography. Okay, so that's the legal agenda, right? What about the First Amendment, right? And so the response is always, frankly, an unsophisticated understanding of the First Amendment, which is the internet is ones and zeros. How dare you, right? It's free speech. All of this is free speech, right? And the more sophisticated response is, and a good response is, once we start regulating online harassment, we're on a slippery slope to a profoundly worse society, right? And that's certainly the sound argument. Like, we realize once we start criminalizing speech and calling it civil rights violations, we've got to be really careful. And I totally agree. We have to be really careful, right? But the First Amendment isn't absolute, right? There are certain categories of speech that the Supreme Court has made crystal clear that provide such negligible contribution to society, and the magnitude of harm is so great that we say of those categories of speech, or those types of speech we've historically recognized as having no or negligible protection, or a very low level of protection, right? And that includes true threats, right? That includes defamation and crime facilitating speech, like solicitation and extortion. And it includes the public disclosure of private facts about purely private matters, right? So the publication of nude photos of someone in violation of their privacy. If we don't protect that privacy, right, we are going to absolutely chill private speech. And so the court, in a series of cases, has talked about when you have the protection of privacy of private matters on the one hand, and interest in disclosure, you've got speech interests on both sides, right? We can't overlook them. And civil rights violations pose little problem for the First Amendment, because what we're punishing, targeting, and penalizing is the singling out of someone because they're a member of a protected class, and the interference with their crucial and tangible life opportunities. And even Scalia agrees in a case called RAV. So what about free speech values? Like, yeah, First Amendment, okay, but what about what really matters, which is free speech principles, right? And there are three central reasons why we protect speech, right? One of them is that it fosters self-governance, right? It lets us both listen to speech and talk in culturally and politically and socially relevant ways so we can govern ourselves and make sophisticated choices, right? So think about it, right? Rape threats, naked photos of someone, defamation contributes so little, right, to kind of cultural, political, and social speech. And I'm talking, they don't contribute much to even offensive ideas or hate speech. It's not hate speech, right? This is the targeted attacks of individuals. And what it does, though, is it silences people, right? So that so it brings us forward just a teeny bit on self-governance, and it costs us a whole lot. As one victim, Zoe Yang, told me, she said, I feel like every time I try to blog again, I'm smashed, you know. And my McKinsey employers, their emails put online, I like can't, and called I'm a slut, I'm a whore, they should know, they should be contacted. It's like, I'm not going online. I've lost my ability, I'm just going to quote her, to be a digital citizen, and she's totally right. So what about the interest of the harassers in their own autonomy and self-expression, right? It's true that when you curb the speech of harassers, they're talking in words and images, right? But I think we should be less concerned with curbing expression of those whose whole reason for doing what they're doing is to silence someone. And it's true that, like, in a really extreme story about the truth-seeking function of the marketplace ideas would say, like, oh, rape threats deserve to be spoken because they're truths. Like, what is the truth? Don't rape me? What is the truth when someone puts up another's nude photo, right? In fact, that's coerced expression of the victim. That's certainly not the expression of the harasser. Who are we kidding, right? So I think free speech values are on our side, right? As long as the agenda against the abuse is really targeted, it's really conservative, right? And in some respects, we have so been here before, right? So in the 1960s and 1970s, we said, early 1970s, we said to women in the workplace, sexual harassment, give me a break, right? It's a perk of the workplace. It's just like what we do in the workplace, right? We said to women, if you don't like it, leave. And we said, look, you're wearing a really pretty outfit. What do you expect? And we say the same things to cyberstalking victims, right? We say time and time again, right? What did you expect, Holly? You gave your boyfriend these photos, right? It's your fault. And we say to people who are threatened with rape online, as Brianna Wu was just telling me on the phone, who's one of the people attacked in Gamergate, people say, it's the internet. What are you thinking? It's like the Wild West. Get over yourself, right? And we say it's just frat boy nonsense. Stop complaining, right? And we said this to women in the 60s and 70s, and law and private actors changed fundamentally how we understand sexual harassment in the workplace. So you all, I always think, thank God for my two teenage daughters, and they're sort of growing up in a world in which they will work in a workplace in which it is not normal, right, for sexual harassment to occur. It will occur, right, but it will be unusual. It'll be like that scary, sick person who does it, right? And that's true for all of you, right, generationally. It's not that it doesn't happen face-to-face in the workplace, but law and social norms say it's not kosher, right? It's not okay. And I think we can do that, right? But it is a task, frankly, for all of us, right? So there's a role for parents and schools and teachers, and I've been talking very closely with many private intermediaries about what they can if they want to, not only if they want to, but what they can do to kind of create norms on their sites. So I should probably stop talking now. I thought I wasn't going to be able to make it, but I'm so psyched for your questions, which is really more of the fun stuff. So thank you so much for having me. So questions? Yeah, thanks.
Just, from your experience with trying to pass that bill in Maryland, do you think it's necessary to, or is it going to take a time until people who have grown up in a digital landscape, people our age, or even actually younger maybe, who are even more immersed in it, who have a more fundamental understanding of the world of the internet before it's really going to gain traction with lawmakers who grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and are not so familiar with it, or are they just that they just don't have a fundamental understanding?
Right. I think that's part of the problem. It's often part of the judge's problems too. Like when they're sentencing defendants, like it's like a slap on the wrist, even though they've been so convicted, because they just, I think, don't really get it, the harm, right? And that may very well be the case. So the delegate in Maryland who sort of spearheaded it was my age. And he was like, I got daughters. I'm all over this. This scares the living daylights out of me. And I think you're right. It goes into committee. And then that's when the horse trading begins. And so the mens rea that we lovingly crafted, knowing someone is a privacy invader intending to harm, is gone. Because, and they keep some other privacy parts of the statute, they don't get it. Like, I think they also just don't understand the First Amendment and what we were trying to accomplish. And you're right, it wasn't important enough. Don't you think? Like, because one of the staffers was texting me saying, we're having a problem here. This part that you guys suggested is going, and what do I say? And I texted an answer, and he wrote back like, I'm so sorry, it just came out wrong. But I think your insight is right. And maybe it takes another 10 years for this to really come, so that we're really in that place where we were in the 70s, with courts sort of recognizing Title VII as a tool to use against sexual harassment, the EOC jumping on board in 1980. Maybe that's going to take some time. Yeah. Yeah, okay, green, polo, and then plaid in the later. Okay.
What are your thoughts on the British government's policies?
Yeah. Right, so this is interesting. In the UK, they have very much the same problem that we have in terms of social attitudes, right? And so I testified at the House of Commons 3 years ago about the phenomenon of online online harassment and its impact on women in particular. And they were wrestling with the difficulty of law enforcement, their own, to leverage their own laws. And it's true that the UK just criminalized revenge porn, like a 2-year punishment, right? And they're moving a little quicker than we are. No, because at the federal level, I know Representative Jackie Spear, I just talked to her team, they're working on legislation. So your question is, do we think that they will move faster than we will? Or, I apologize, I didn't hear the very last part.
Thoughts in general, the outcomes.
Well, they're new. They're like hot off the presses for 2 weeks ago, right? So we'll see. I think last summer for the UK was a huge kind of zeitgeist moment. Remember, there were these attacks on Twitter of MPs, female MPs, and the woman who was behind the campaign to put Jane Austen on the banknotes. So Laura Criado, I think her last name's Priello, had like graphic threats and bomb threats. So did MPs who stood up for her. And Twitter, finally, right, creates this block button. And the UK, I think lawmakers start waking up to this because their own were threatened with bomb. So MPs were threatened with bomb threats and rape threats. So maybe that's part of why they're kind of moving faster than we are. And also because do we think Congress is going to do anything? They can't pass a budget. I'm stressed out about that. Like, you know, the idea that I, so in my books, look to states as kind of our leaders, and I think Kamala Harris is a perfect example. But, you know, I'd love for us to follow the UK example. Right, and then, okay,
so
bye.
we probably have one more question just because this room, unfortunately, will be open. But
that makes me so sad.
I will just quickly, before you ask your question, Danielle's going to be at Ada's Technical Books, which is this wonderful bookstore in Capitol Hill, signing these books and talking more. So if you all want to come to that, it's a really lovely space as well. And maybe she can still talk, which that was amazing given the.
Are you proud of me?
I'm so proud of you.
I got better over time. Yeah.
One more question, then we'll go clear out of the room. Yeah.
Sure. So I was curious about.
Yeah.
So I was curious.
Yeah. I think I'm with our friend Mark Rotenberg, who has talked about how the right to be forgotten is something we should, in very narrow respect, celebrate, right? I think for revenge porn victims, if we had adjudicative bodies and not, I don't know if I trust Google, right, or search engines to be judge and executioner, but if we had adjudicators and on the very narrow sort of topic of non-consensual pornography, if we could take it down, that's so often what victims want, almost like an in rem interest in the photograph, which they own, frankly, right, often, or 80% of the time. I think it's encouraging. I think it just goes too far, the Spain decision, right, like entrusting search engines to make these decisions and not worry about the heckler's veto, which scares the living daylights out of me from a free speech perspective. So I'm like a fan, but like in a real narrow way.
Well, thanks again, Danielle.
Thank you, guys.